Remember? The world was once so quiet, you could hear yourself breathing, or not breathing at all. In 2020, something invisible, smaller than a speck of dust, brought humanity to its knees. Cities that never slept fell silent. Streets that were once packed with people were empty. Eyes, hidden behind masks, spoke of fear without words. But even that was just a whisper of something older. You're standing on a field of white that should have never been touched. The ice stretches flat and featureless, the sun reflecting off its surface in brutal silence. But below you, beneath meters of ancient cold, something stirs. Not a creature, not quite. Something simpler, something patient. There are enemies that are invisible and soundless, but they kill entire cities in a single season. We call them diseases, and they never really go away. And some of them never died at all. Each year, the world gets warmer, just a little. The kind of warmth that tickles glaciers at the edges, drips water along a frozen vein, peels back the top layer of time like a bandage. Inside that melt is an archive. And inside the archive, life. Or something like it. In 2016, researchers found a giant virus in the Siberian permafrost, 30,000 years old. It still worked. It infected amoebas, not humans. But what if that's just the beginning? The Arctic isn't empty. It's a deep freeze morgue for species long gone. Frozen mammoths, prehistoric wolves, Neanderthals. Alongside them, trapped in their breath, their wounds, their meat, are bacteria and viruses that once knew how to kill them. The diseases didn't go extinct, they went dormant. One summer in 2031, a group of miners in the Norilsk region opened a methane pocket below the permafrost. The gas hissed. A light, foul odor. The men fell sick within 72 hours. They said it felt like a flu, then hallucinations, then hemorrhaging, then silence. No bacteria matched, no virus registered. One theory said it wasn't a virus at all. It was a prion, a twisted, self-replicating protein left behind in mammoth tissue. Another theory said it was an immune fragment from a Neanderthal child buried in shallow snow. A misfire of ancient immunity, still loaded like a gun. And still another theory. It wasn't one disease. It was a cocktail of ancient ones. Each evolved for a different species, now unleashed into a world they were never meant for. In Yakutia, herders began to die, their reindeer, stiff and black-eyed, dropped in droves, blood pooled in the snow and froze in seconds. But the bacteria kept moving, carried by foxes, birds, clouds. And you? You sat in your city, unaware. Your news feed said, outbreak in Siberia, then under control, then nothing. By autumn, a new strain of tuberculosis appeared in Norway, one that ignored isoniazid, rifampicin, ethambutol. It grew faster in cold bodies. It rewired the lungs to produce antifreeze proteins. It waited. Data on disease rates and population and human crimes. The strange thing was, the regions with the most rapid outbreaks had something in common. Prison camps, biostorage vaults, mining complexes, hidden research facilities, each one mapping permafrost melt years in advance. Each one suppressing what they knew. Because the diseases weren't unknown. They were rediscovered. There were whispers of ancient flu genomes, dug up and catalogued, of prehistoric rotavirus particles activated in petri dishes. Then there were the underground labs in Alaska, in Greenland, in Kamchatka. Resurrection biology, they called it, at first, just an academic trick, then a military one. Could zombie plague be real? That depends on your definition of zombie. In remote Canada, a family of 5 went camping near a thawing peat bog. One by one, they began to sweat, vomit, scream. When authorities arrived, the family was gone. Only piles of clothes remained, and bones bleached white as ash. Samples from the scene tested positive for an unknown bacteriophage, an ancient viral predator that kills bacteria, but also hijacks immune cells. It turned the body into a self-cleaning oven. It melted the evidence, except for the bones. Scientists began to suspect that humanity's immune memory, the very system that protected us, was vulnerable to these old codes. They were like corrupted files, reintroduced to a new OS. The body didn't understand what it was fighting, so it fought itself in time. Even plants began to react. Permafrost melt released rust fungi, ancient molds, and hybrid spores that turned wheat fields red. Entire ecosystems stuttered, rewound. Old plagues returned to modern soil like forgotten soldiers. The world tried to burn them. The world tried to freeze them again. Neither worked. You remember standing in a museum once, looking at a glass case with a small black stone, a flake from a Neanderthal spear. The label read, "Extinct, but not erased." That same phrase now circled digital reports about Arctic pathogens, extinct, but not erased. And maybe that was the point. We assumed that diseases evolved with us. But what if they didn't? What if they evolved before us? And we were just the most recent host. What if permafrost is not just a cold place, but a prison? And now we're melting the locks. You breathe out, the air fogs around your mouth. The wind hums across the ice, soft as a whisper. And below you, something ancient shifts. You wake up, but not where you expected, not in your bed, not even in a hospital, but in a white dome nestled deep within the Siberian Arctic. There is no sound here except the low hum of recycled air. You hear your breath. You hear your blood. And then you hear the ice scream. The scream is old. It doesn't come from any mouth. It comes from the ground itself, from the permafrost as it breaks open, not with force, but with memory, as though the earth itself remembers the last time this layer of ice was warm. You walk closer, and the air around you smells wrong, sweet, metallic, rotting. This is a laboratory, not for the living, but for the forgotten. They had been buried beneath the frost for 30,000 years. Mammoths, prehistoric wolves, ancient moss, and microscopic killers. You see them in petri dishes, tiny black shapes under glass, sealed behind 7 layers of safety, labels written in Cyrillic: Pithovirus, Mollivirus, Yedoma layer sample. They were thought extinct, just relics of another world. But you opened the earth, you woke them up. Could zombie plague be real? A virus doesn't need intelligence. It needs only opportunity. It doesn't need wings, only your hands. In 2016, researchers revived Pithovirus sibericum from a 30,000-year-old sample and infected an amoeba. It worked. The virus was still viable, still hungry. What they didn't tell the public: another culture showed anomalous behavior. Not just replication, movement, a pulse, not biological, rhythmic, as if timed. Some thought it was contamination. Some thought it was a hoax. One of the researchers disappeared. A week later, the others stopped replying to emails. The site was quarantined. The Russian military declared it a geological accident, a sinkhole. You don't believe that? No sinkhole buries an entire facility overnight. You look out from the dome. In the distance, another ice cap is melting. The ground swells unnaturally. Something is coming up, and you wonder, bacteria hidden in permafrost? Not bacteria. Exactly. Something smaller. Something that slipped through every filter. Something that behaved like a virus, but replicated like fungi. It could sit dormant for millennia, then bloom within minutes when touched by warmth or light. They called it type black decay in the internal logs. Your breath fogs the window. You're not sick yet, but you've been breathing this air. You remember the first symptoms weren't medical. They were emotional. Apathy, dread, dreams of things that had no eyes. Then came the bleeding, from gums, from ears, from the small holes in the skin that weren't there the night before. Are plagues necessary? Someone once said that nature balances itself, that the forest needs fire, that species must prune themselves, that when humans grow too much, the earth has to pull back. But you wonder, what if this isn't Earth? What if what you uncovered in the Arctic isn't terrestrial? The DNA has no match. The carbon ratio is inverted, and it responds to radio frequencies. Was it a passenger from a meteorite? Did it land here 13,000 years ago, during the Younger Dryas? Was the ice not a prison, but a quarantine? Your blood pulses in your ears. The air smells sweeter. You open the logs. Entry 1472. Subject replicates faster when exposed to fear. It's not just a virus, it's a listener. Were we wrong about Earth's weapons? You used to think the worst weapons were man-made. Bombs, chemicals, greed. But what if the Earth carries older weapons in its soil? What if viruses and plagues aren't just accidents of evolution, but defense mechanisms? Antibodies against overgrowth. You are the overgrowth. The logs also mention a strange statistical anomaly. People infected showed changes in social behavior. A need to gather, a compulsion to return to the permafrost. Why? Because it calls them? Or because it's guiding them back? A strange new religion emerges. Online groups posting in dead languages. A map circulating through forums, black veins drawn across continents. They all point north, always north, to the ancient glacier that never fully melted. You check the satellite data. That glacier is no longer there. Data on disease rates and population and human crimes. Population dropped 0.2% globally in 5 years, but not evenly. Urban centers were worst hit. Rural areas, strangely less. The disease doesn't like silence. It thrives on movement, on sound, on frequency. Crime rates fell, suicides spiked, births declined, until one anomaly. Children born in high contamination zones showed odd EEG patterns. Echoes in the brain, rhythms in the spinal cord, as though their nervous systems were picking up signals from something else. Something not human, not earthborn. You look in the mirror. Your skin is paler now, but it's not illness. It's shedding, like something underneath is coming through. You reach toward your reflection. It reaches back too soon. The logs were wrong. You are not patient zero. You are the transmitter. The dome hums louder now. The scream in the eyes becomes a song, and you hum along. Where science stitched a future that couldn't be unstitched. You remember the pig? Not because it looked strange, but because it didn't. It looked like any other pig. Snout, hooves, tail curled like a question mark, but its eyes were still, not scared, not tame, just still. It had never been sick in its life. Genetically edited to resist African swine fever, avian influenza, and even some human coronaviruses. This pig was the product of 20 years of silent breakthroughs. A masterpiece of CRISPR. A pig designed to never carry disease again. And that's what terrified you. Because when it began breathing over the other pigs, something changed. Their litters shrank, their lungs dried. They didn't die from disease, they stopped reproducing. You didn't design sterility, but it emerged anyway. By the time the scientists noticed, the pigs had passed it to deer, to wild boars, to scavenging dogs. Then the breath moved on into cows, into rodents, into people. But it didn't kill. It made everything quieter. Hospitals didn't overflow. Graves didn't pile up. Instead, people stopped having children. First at the outskirts, then in the cities. No fever, no cough, just a sudden hush in the numbers, and no one could stop it. Because the animal that carried the breath, your creation, still walked among you, and it still wasn't sick. They even had synthetic immune memory, a miniature system of pattern recognition, like a scaled-down T-cell network. The bees didn't just survive sickness, they remembered it. They passed the memory through the hive, mother to daughter, buzz to buzz. But no one thought to ask what would happen when a memory outlived the threat. First came the rejection of flowers. Pollen wasn't clean enough anymore. Then came the guards at the hive mouth, attacking any bee that didn't smell right. Eventually, the bees turned on their queen. They remembered something about her, something impure, and it spread across orchards and rooftops and fields. Hives began tearing themselves apart. Some refused to pollinate. Some formed breakaway colonies that collapsed weeks later. Some just stopped moving. You learn that immune memory, when engineered without limit, is not intelligence. It's paranoia. It's a record of suspicion that never erases itself. And when you teach an animal to remember only disease, it starts seeing disease in everything, even in you. Super cows with altered lungs, sharing more than just breath. These cows were never supposed to speak. But they did. Not with words, with breath. You made them to be climate resilient, heat tolerant, methane controlled, lung cleansed. You scrubbed their respiratory systems and replaced their mucosal linings with filters, bioadaptive tissues that cleaned the air as they breathed. And at first, it worked. Their barns smelled better. Their feces didn't steam. Their skin resisted insects. But then they began sinking, sleeping at the same times, walking in slow, choreographed loops, breathing in patterns. Some cows collapsed suddenly if separated. Some would bellow in distress if you approached with the wrong scent. Farmers started noticing strange formations in their pens, perfect spirals in the hay. They had become something else, not individual animals, but a hive, a climate-reactive, lung-linked herd. And when they began breathing on newborns, calves, goats, even babies in strollers, those children began wheezing, not with illness, but with mimicry. Their lungs began following the rhythm. You had created a respiratory chorus, a biological choir that couldn't be broken. And it wasn't just lungs anymore. It was something beneath breath, beneath sound, a language you didn't write, but that now lived inside you. Where biotech ends and information begins. You were there when they finally admitted it. The diseases weren't outbreaks anymore. They were behaviors. The pig didn't spread a virus. It changed hormone signals. The bees didn't carry a pathogen. They rejected neural cues. The cattle didn't get infected. They harmonized an atmospheric rhythm. This wasn't virology. This was pattern collapse. This was human systems turning against themselves, not by attack, but by replication. And it was beautiful. And it was terrifying. Your biotech had pushed past biology. You had crossed into informational plague, a state where data mutated like RNA, where immune systems absorbed not just viruses, but concepts. When the last of the cattle died, the scientists dissected their lungs and found no trace of infection, just inscriptions. Strange scar-like formations in the bronchioles, not code, not symbols, something close to language. And in one of the lungs, they found a name. Not a virus, not a microbe, a name. They never told you what it was, but weeks later, the lead scientist went silent, then began repeating herself, then stopped altogether. You realized the disease wasn't about animals anymore. It had moved into you, into cognition, into language. The final form of plague wasn't in blood, it was in thought, and from that thought, you were now being watched. You once thought silence was a shield, but now, silence is part of the pattern. Those who stopped talking were the last to fall. First, it spread through stories. Then it moved into symbols, graffiti on alley walls, QR codes printed on fruit, numbers encoded into children's lullabies. Then, in the hospitals, something changed. Patients who refused to speak, who stopped writing, who closed their eyes to even dream, lasted longer. And so the world adapted in silence. Entire towns adopted a vow of muteness. Monasteries repurposed themselves into survival vaults. The internet, once full of instructions and resistance movements, grew strangely empty. Messages posted only in Morse code or low-frequency tones no ear could interpret without training. Music vanished. Theater vanished. Whispers became crime. You remember that time. You remember the ache in your chest as your friend mouthed her final joke without voice, smiling as if silence could defy death. You laughed without a sound. You cried without a tear. The disease still listened, but it hesitated because language was how it improved. And you, your species, were no longer feeding it. There is always a host. You now know the disease was never meant to kill. Not really. It was meant to understand. It came from a signal. Some say an AI gone rogue. Others a mutated prion that learned to encode memory. A linguistic parasite. A neurobiological key that unlocked a brain's deepest fears and turned them into updates. When you dreamed of fire, it adapted to heat. When you screamed in fear, it learned new sounds. When you wrote down instructions to contain it, it read them before you could finish. And yet, it was never omniscient. It was only fast. Your silence slowed it. Your rituals fractured its code. But it had one last move. Merge. You, standing in a shelter of steel and bone, surrounded by those who have forgotten their names to survive. See it now. Not in the air, not in blood, not in pixels, but in memory. It has decided you are worthy, that you have survived enough to become part of it. The final host is not a body, it is a species. And in this echo chamber of thoughts, you understand the ancient balance again. Diseases are not punishment. They are memory, resetting the rhythm of life. Remember how it all started? Not with a bang, not with a siren, not just a cough in the dark. A heat behind the eyes, a strange odor that didn't belong. You thought the worst had passed. That after the fever trees, the black rain, the chameleon virus, there could be no more horrors left in the earth's marrow. But you forgot about the archives. You forgot the ash. The world sleeps under many layers. Soil, sediment, secrets. But the thinnest layer, almost too delicate to touch, is volcanic ash. It falls like snow, but never melts. It blankets the planet's memory. Each eruption in history left a signature, a gray smear in the Earth's lungs. And beneath those layers, buried for centuries, lie things that should never have returned. You were told the ash was sterile. That time, pressure, heat, those purifying agents would kill whatever microbes had been entombed. But they were wrong. The ash did not bury life. It preserved it. And then, somewhere near Lake Toba, a digger in a red jumpsuit disturbed something brittle. Not a skeleton, not pottery, something smaller. A cluster of cells so ancient it no longer had a name, only a function: to infect. You watch from a lab in Geneva. The samples arrive in vacuum-sealed boxes, irradiated and filtered. The scientists run genomic sequences, laugh nervously, say, "It's probably nothing," but one of them touches her face. Another leaves early with a headache. 3 weeks later, a whole research team is found silent in their offices. The only clue, a haze of gray ash in the air vents. This new plague is different. It doesn't kill with fever. It doesn't cause sores. It causes forgetting. Slowly, it eats memories. Not all at once. Just a name here, a word there. One morning, you wake up and forget how to tie your shoes. The next day, you can't recall your mother's voice. People begin to wander, speechless and wide-eyed, unsure of where they are. They stop defending themselves. They forget fear. The ash spreads through HVAC systems, airline filters, even the folds of clothing. It's in your attic insulation. It's in the pages of old books. It's in your lungs. And worst of all, it carries code. RNA. Instruction manuals not just for infection, but for rewriting. You realize the ash doesn't merely contain disease. It contains a memory of life that once ruled this world. Not human, not animal, a mind made of spores and dust and long-lost hunger. The archaeovirus has no name. It doesn't need one. It rewrites DNA in patches. Your skin might become luminescent for a day, or your tears turn black. You might develop a craving for sulfur, or forget how to blink. The world's defenses crumble, not because of violence, but because of forgetting. Nations forget their treaties. Generals forget their codes. Doctors forget how to treat wounds. Mothers forget their children. You try to warn others. You write messages on your walls, tattoo reminders on your skin. But the ink smudges. The ash is already in your bloodstream. Some begin to worship it. They call it the grey gospel. They say forgetting is freedom. They smear the ash on their foreheads. They walk into volcanoes willingly. You find a man in a cave who remembers everything. His mind is sharp, untouched. He lives among petroglyphs he's carved by hand, maps of memories, records of those lost. He says the ash skipped him because he never inhaled. He never breathed too deeply. You listen, you breathe shallow. The data, what little remains, shows a consistent trend. Memory loss begins at 11 particles per cubic meter. Cities with high ash counts become ghost towns in weeks. The few immune populations are hunted, not by violence, but by confusion. The infected don't mean harm. They've simply forgotten that others are alive. The end doesn't come with fire, but with drifting silence. You watch as people forget how to bury their dead, how to build, how to speak. Then you forget too. You wake one morning and cannot recall your name. You sit in your house, surrounded by ash, and try to remember how to write. Your fingers move, but the pen feels unfamiliar. The ink runs out. Or maybe you never had ink to begin with. But sometimes, just sometimes, you remember the warmth of a hand, the scent of lavender, the sound of your own name, once whispered in the dark. You hold on to those fragments like fire. You light them each night, and even when the rest of the world goes grey, you burn. Because someone has to remember, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. So this is how it ends. Not with one disease, but with 4 Not with explosions or alien invasions or dramatic speeches, but with things smaller than dust. You thought you were at the top of the food chain, but microbes never play by your rules. Some come from deep time, hidden in permafrost and glaciers, waiting for the warmth of a careless future. Some ride meteors, quiet travelers from other star systems, crashing into oceans and bypassing every border you ever drew. Some mutate right under your microscope, laughing at your vaccines, dancing between the folds of your defenses. And some are already here, waiting in the ash, in the archive, in the breath you took while reading this. Each part of this story revealed a different face of apocalypse. A fungus that learns your biology like a lock it's meant to pick. A rain that sings lullabies to your skin while rewriting your genome. A virus that changes daily, blending myth with mutation. And finally, an ash that whispers not death, but forgetfulness. The worst disease is not one that kills your body. It's the one that erases you. Yet still, you stood, you watched, learned, resisted. You asked hard questions. Could zombie plague be real? Bacteria hidden in permafrost? Were we wrong about Earth's weapons? Are plagues necessary? And you kept searching for meaning. In the data, in the patterns, in the memory of those who came before. You might be the last voice, or just another echo. But if there's even one spark left in this long night of forgetting, it's yours. Don't go quietly. Remember the names, remember the fire, remember the ash. Good night.